It's a challenging time to be a teacher. We don't get paid a lot, the days can be long and exhausting, demands from students, parents, admins, and districts can be intense. There is always room for improvement, and there is always more to do. There are always new procedures to learn, new programs to run, new strategies to master. But it's when our fire burns the lowest that we remember our purpose. We teach because we're resilient. We teach because we're problem solvers. We teach because investing in kids is one of the highest callings we can imagine. We teach because we know that the classroom can be a place of magic and possibility. We teach because we have an unquenchable fire for learning and a passion to share it. We teach because our colleagues are some of the best human beings we will ever meet. We teach because we have an opportunity to influence the global citizens that will make this world a better place. If you're still on fire for learning and growth, join the Teachers on Fire Roundtable for conversations that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your practice. You'll hear from real people and real educators with real solutions, not make-believe perfection, but ideas, inspiration, and a path toward change and transformation in K-12 education today. My name is Tim Cavey. I'm an 8th grade teacher, assistant principal, and the host of the Teachers on Fire podcast. I'm inviting you to join us at the Teachers on Fire Roundtable. Because you matter, your voice is important, and we are all better together. Well, good morning, Teachers on Fire. I'm so glad you could make it this morning for another conversation that will warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. My name is Tim Cavey. I'm an 8th grade teacher, middle school vice principal, and the host of the Teachers on Fire podcast. And I'm so excited this morning to be joined with these fabulous authors of books about Genius Hour. So what is Genius Hour and how can we use it and why use it? We're going to get into all of those questions and some difficult, challenging questions here in just a moment. But first of all, I want to welcome you here. If you are a viewer joining us live, thank you. We appreciate you. Would you say hello and let us know where you are coming from this morning? We would love to say hello to you. And without further ado, let's get into it and meet my guest this morning. So, would you tell us briefly who you are and what your context in education looks like today, starting with Denise?
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you, Tim. And I am in the country of Bahrain, which is a small island nation off the coast of Saudi Arabia. Since the pandemic, my position has changed. Last year, I spent the whole year doing reading intervention and small group work. And now I'm officially volunteering because I'm only here for 4 more months, and then we're going to be moving back to California. So that's my context right now. But before that, I taught 5th grade, and I did Genius Hour with my 5th graders and kindergartners at the same bilingual school in Bahrain.
All right, very interesting. And Andi.
Well, hey guys, I'm McNair, and if you can't tell from my accent, I'm from Texas. I really appreciate the opportunity to share today, Tim. And so the context that I kind of work with Genius Hour now is that I work at ESC Region 12, which is a service center here in Texas. I'm a digital innovation specialist. And so I travel often and talk to teachers about what Genius Hour can look like in the classroom, what it looked like in my classroom, the mistakes that we made, the things that we learned along the way, and really how PBL, passion-based learning, Genius Hour, all of those things can be done in a way that is both manageable and meaningful.
Those are such important keywords, manageable and meaningful. I'm sure we'll come back to them often. Well, Andi, I'll throw it back to you because I don't want to assume that people just know intuitively what Genius Hour is. So you got into it a little bit there. Can you expand on Genius Hour? What does it look like in a classroom? And what makes the venture worthwhile?
Oh my goodness, that's a big question. But first of all, I would just say that for me, Genius Hour changed my career. I was really in a place where I didn't even know if I was going to stay in education. I felt like what I was doing in my classroom wasn't meaningful for my learners and had to really find something that was going to ignite that spark for learning again. And for me, that was Genius Hour. For my learners, that was Genius Hour. And so in a nutshell, I would say that it's an opportunity for your learners to pursue their passions during the school day. And for me, that meant taking it a step further and them using what they were learning in the classroom to integrate that into their projects and then creating change and making an impact on the world around them through whatever they were working on.
That's a very tight summary. I know there's a lot more you could say there, but thank you for that. Well, if you are joining us live, I see a number of people watching and coming along with us this morning. Let us know in the chat, do you do Genius Hour? I don't even know if that's the right way to say it, but do you facilitate Genius Hour in your classroom? Is that something you've experimented with? Is it something you are interested in? We want to hear from you. I'm going to move on and put this question to Denise. I know there's a whole lot. I mean, you've both written books on this subject, but Denise, for that teacher looking to get started with Genius Hour this year, perhaps, what are some of your best tips, tricks, and recommendations for those teachers?
Okay, I first would say that you are in a great position to be thinking about Genius Hour. And because that at the beginning of the school year where you're building community, that's the most important thing I would say, is that trusting, learning community that you're building. And so when you get that, like, you can't just do Genius Hour without having that trust of your students. I think one of the things that sounds easy but difficult is that transferring of ownership of the learning. And so as we as we build that community this year, then as you trust the students and make it a safe place for all the learning and questioning to go on, that's what makes them ready for Genius Hour. I guess for me, like Andi said, it transformed my teaching was being transformed as I was giving ownership to students. And then Genius Hour came out of that. And so I think that's, yeah, it is a lot like PYP and inquiry-based learning, is we are giving it over to them. And I guess that's the biggest thing I can say, is that let them own it. Self-evaluate, self-reflect a lot, and you help them through that process.
I think that's well said, Denise, and you've touched on some of the key fears I think that teachers have, and that is about giving up control and about trusting students with the learning. You know, we think about students grabbing onto that control and we get a little bit worried. We think, is the rigor going to be there? Is there actually going to be learning, or is it all just fun and games? And so we're going to get into some of those questions here in a moment. I'm happy to see my friend Ryan Coop, who's a fellow middle school educator here from Surrey, and he is the origin of the next 4 questions I'm going to give you, ladies. So Ryan, thanks for tuning in momentarily. And I've got a comment here from Mark, who is in the UAE. He says, exactly, driving student inquiry and student voice, then push for action. So it's an exciting space, a little bit of a risky space for some educators, but let's get into some questions. So for a little bit of context, Ryan shared these questions with me some months ago, and they were, I thought they were really, really challenging. I had some good answers, but I thought this would be more fun, actually, to recruit some experts and put these questions to them. So here is the first one. How can we best support students that want to rush into creation without proper preparation, skills, or background information? Andi, is that idea, that assumption there of preparation, skills, background information, do students need to do a little bit of groundwork before they launch into some big activity?
Absolutely. That was a lesson that I had to learn with my students when we first launched Genius Hour. I was learning from amazing people like Denise Krebs and Don Wettrick and so many people who were doing Genius Hour. And I just wanted to jump right in. And I was so stoked, so excited. And as we began to do that, this was one of the lessons that I had to kind of learn that, okay, I can just, say, hey, what is your passion? Now work on a project. But the problem was that we really needed a roadmap, right? We needed these stops that we had to make along the way. I didn't want it to be a checklist. I wanted it to be a roadmap of places my students had to stop, but they could explore different things in each place. So for us, those things were obviously the 6 Ps, right? They would start with their passion, plan their project, pitch their idea. Then they would work on a project to develop a product and then give a presentation. And so those first 3 pieces, that passion, plan, and pitch, I think that's really what answers this question. That was really our prep time, figuring out, first of all, what in the world is your passion and how do you even know what that is? And then helping them understand that purposeful planning is a really important part of the process. And teaching them how to do that through scaffolding and giving them specific questions that they had to answer, and documenting those steps along the way became important. And the more I work with teachers now with Genius Hour, passion-based learning, the more important that has become. So for me, that's what that looked like, just intentionally building those stops in, or those places on the roadmap where my learners knew, I can drive this and I can do this in the way that makes sense for me. But if I don't do these things, my project may not be as successful or may not be as valuable to me as it should be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I hear you saying is you do sort of have to step in a little bit and regulate or coach students. Do I have that right?
Absolutely. And I think that was a misconception that I had. I really thought, first of all, when I told my students they were going to pursue their passion, they were going to be like, yeah, teacher of the year, like, this is awesome. And it was difficult for them because they just needed. So I always say, gosh, yes, I 100% believe that our students should be in the driver's seat and giving them that opportunity. What I had to learn was I just had to be in the passenger seat, right? Sometimes I had to give them a little bit of direction of like, hey, you made the wrong turn here. Sometimes I had to reach over and grab the wheel and be like, we're running off the road here. I got to take control. But I was always in the passenger seat where they were in the driver's seat, if that helps.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea, Andi, of checkpoints along the way. Well, before I throw the next question to Denise, I want to see if I can share with the viewers and listeners a few examples of Genius Hour or passion projects from my 8th grade class last year. So I wrote this blog post and I was just ecstatic. Let me make sure this is showing up properly. Yep. I was just ecstatic in terms of how far they went and what kinds of things they tried. And so this is one class of 8th graders, one term in the year. Let me just read some examples. We've got the creation of a cooking website called Rock and Bowl Feed Your Soul. We've got research on the nature of social privilege with insights from social and cognitive psychology. Creation of a video collage of gaming highlights, Lego stop motion videos, music composition, that was on a website called Soundation, a deep dive on Rubik's Cube solution strategies, that was really a deep dive, video animations, bullet journaling, creating a Roblox game, tying knots, building clay earrings, and then selling or marketing those earrings on a website, needle felting, abstract painting, hip-hop tracks. Oh, there's the Soundation. Okay. Greenhouse frame design, cooking videos, a short story, and more. Doesn't that collection, ladies, just blow your mind? What those 8th graders were able to come up with in the space of one term. And of course, 3 terms of that last year. So my teacher heart was so full, and hopefully what I'm trying to do there is just give you a better idea of what Genius Hour can look like in your classroom. Well, Denise, I'll throw the next question to you, and let me make sure I have the right one here. Yes, here it is. How should we respond when students try or select project ideas that don't appear to develop any new meaningful skills or knowledge? So, that student is trying something that you think, I'm not sure if you're actually gaining any new knowledge or skills here. Maybe it's something very, very basic. Have you ever had that problem, and how did you respond?
Yes, I have. And those are the ones that you you sit in the passenger seat a lot with Andi's analogy. And, there were some that I had conferences with 2 times in a period, not once every 2 or 3 weeks, but like constantly with them. However, I would also, be asking people to be careful before they judge if something is not new, and that to build skills and knowledge and something that we already know is valuable as well. Like if I'm learning Spanish, but I want to dig deep and learn more and develop my skills, I can go deeper, wider. I might decide to write a novel in Spanish, and so really people can take their passions and go many different ways with them. So I just would be careful of that wording, that we don't have to do something, but the way you mentioned it, of just that shallow, okay, I'm finished. And that again comes with getting in that passenger seat with them and helping them discover that, hopefully by themselves again, because if they can own it, then they can see, I guess I didn't dig very deep. I guess my proposal's not very rich. Like if they can admit that, then they can solve the problem as well with your guidance again. So I think it's okay to not have something new every time. Mm-hmm. Does that answer? Does that help?
Absolutely. Oh, my voice is cracking. I'm so excited. Absolutely. And I think, for that student who you use the example of Spanish, or maybe it's drawing or playing the violin or something else. Maybe it's something they are very familiar with, but if they can demonstrate to me, if they can demonstrate some new learning targets, new growth that they are aiming for, then that's satisfactory. You mentioned something, Denise, really important, I think, and that is conferencing. And Andi alluded to it with her coaching as well. Andi, is there anything more that you would add in terms of this? The student wants to build a house made of Lego again. And it's not easy to see. Is there any new growth here or learning? What would you say to that student?
Yeah, so I would say one of the things that, first of all, I wish I would have thought about this in my own classroom, but one of the things that I've started encouraging educators to do is to have your students write purpose statements before they start their project. So they would just write one sentence that says, I want to learn about blank, or to Denise's point, they could say, I want to learn more about blank so that I can. And I think it's the so that I can that gives meaning and purpose to the project. Like, I'm not just building Legos to build Legos because I think it's fun or because it's something that I know well and I can do this easily, but there's a purpose behind this. I'm doing this so that I can impact someone else. I'm doing this so that I can create change, or so that I can innovate and create something new, whatever that is. But I think that purpose statement before they work on a project, I want to learn more about blank so that I can blank, can really make this manageable for teachers and do it in a way that makes sense.
I love that. And Andi, at my middle school, we are trying to get into those I can statements and go to those learning targets every time we can. And so if students think in terms of what is the objective here, it's not just something I'm doing. I'm not just doing Lego or doing violin, but what am I actually trying to master? Thinking about mastery or new learning, new growth. I think that's really important. That's very helpful. Well, let's go on to the next question. And this one deals with, and before I move on, I did see a couple of comments that I thought were great. So Ryan, hopefully we've asked this follow-up question. He says, what if it seems more like play? And I think you spoke to that a little bit, Andi. We have someone from Twitter say, I think this is Jason Blair, saying these are great. Imagine if they had passion pop-up stations where they could then teach classmates. I think he's referring to that list of examples that I read from my 8th grade class, and that is a great point. That's something that I did not really follow up with, but if students could begin teaching other students, that's the ideal. And Laura, good morning to you, coming in from Indianapolis this morning. All right, let's go into our next question, and this one, I want to make sure I'm getting the right one. Okay, this one is asks this question: how should we respond when student learning and improvement appears to be stalling? So, similar idea. They're in a space. Do we just sort of handle this through conferencing or checkpoints? Or, Andi, they are in the activity, nothing new seems to be happening. How do you respond?
I think a couple of things. I think conferencing for sure. I agree with Denise that that's so important. And I also think that that's why documentation of the learning is so important, so that you do know where they are in the process versus just they're coming in and working on their project. And it's like, okay, what are we doing? Where are we today? If you have documentation of their progress, whether that be on Google, like having each one of the 6 Ps on Google Slides and having them document their passion, their plan, all of those things. If there's a place where they're doing that, you can kind of track that progress and know when they're stalling. And then I think just as a teacher, that purpose statement really allows you to kind of stoke the flame when it starts to fizzle out. You know, I read a great article one time that talked about passion being the flame, purpose being the foundation or the wood that sustains that flame. And so using purpose to kind of, you know, remember why we're working on this project. Have you accomplished that yet? And what could we do today to move the needle forward? I think those are the things we have to ask. But in my opinion, that's why purpose is so important, because if you don't have purpose behind the project, that passion is eventually going to fizzle out and you won't have any way to stoke the fire. There won't be anything to get it to ignite it again.
Well said. And if you are hanging on to Andi's words here and you'd like to know more, we will talk about her book and Denise's book here at the end of the show. So stay tuned for that. Passion and purpose, they both need to be there in order to keep that learning going. Now, you talked, I do want to follow up quickly, Andi, on the documentation. I love that idea, and I'm by nature a documenter. I love to document everything and everywhere I can, kind of obsessively. But for students, I mean, what are some of the best mechanisms that you've seen for that? My mind goes toward sort of a rolling Google Doc that they can return to, or checkpoints is something that I would integrate through Google Classroom here in my context. How would you recommend that student self-reflect? A seesaw would be another way to do that. But how would you recommend that student documentation of learning? I think that's a key too.
There's 2 ways that I encourage teachers to do that. One would be on Flipgrid, right? To create a group and have the 6 Ps or whatever process. Sorry, I need a Dr. Pepper apparently. Whatever process you're using, working through that and having your students like, hey, on passion, and recording a video from you, the teacher, here's what you do on passion, and then letting them document through video what their passion is, and then plan and then pitch, so that there's continual documentation every day. I think you could also do Google Slides, and I actually have, and I can share that with you, Tim. I have the slides already created for the process. Obviously, it's for the 6 Ps, but you could change it to whatever process you're using. And it just has the different, okay, on passion, this is what I want you to document. On plan, and then the only slide that they would make several copies of would be the actual when they're working on the project, because they would be reflecting each and every day. So every day they would make a new slide for project, so that they're documenting their learning as they work on it. But I just think that keeps them on track, and it helps you, the educator, first of all, justify why you're doing this in your classroom. And anybody who thinks it's fun time, you can pull up those slides and show what they're doing and what they're learning, which I think is really valuable.
Google Slides, of course, another great way to do that. And so if you are a Google Classroom user, that's easy. Even if you don't use Classroom, if you're on another LMS, that would still work. So there you have it. And thank you, Andi. You mentioned sharing something with me. I'll follow. I'll hold you to it after this conversation. Thank you so much. Well, Denise, let's get to that student who tells us, but Mrs. Krebs, I don't know what to do. I don't have any interest in anything at all. How do you respond to that student? I know I always say, hey, you can always research dolphins. That's my default, my go-to project. But how do you respond to that student?
That's funny. Well, I thought, does Ryan also teach grade 8?
He does.
So that could be sometimes the older students, maybe a little more, but not necessarily. You always will have some of those who just don't know what to do. And I guess that's the ones where you really just rub elbows with them and help them find their passion. You know, my favorite story happened a lot of years ago, 10 years ago, maybe. Joy is his name. And he was such a good helper. He was like everybody's best friend. Everybody loved Joey. but he couldn't do his own project. He just always wanted to help someone else. He was always part of a little team or just helping his buddy. And so finally, I just needed, I felt like he needed, for his sake, to do something of his own. And so I just spent time with him, and then we just were writing lists, and he said something about hydraulics. I went, okay, there you go, hydraulics. It's not dolphins, something he's interested in. So he just started watching videos, and he went to the veterinary and bought tubing, and he created this little syringe hydraulic system. He made the wood at home and made it into a little lift. It was amazing, and everybody was so impressed. And I think that really built his confidence, and it was like, then you just watch Joey running ahead, he just needed more help finding that place. And so I think it's okay to let them be part of a team that maybe they're not. So I'm not, actually, I'd be curious what Andi thinks about this, but I would always say they could be in groups of 3 or less. I didn't want the groups to be so big that people didn't have ownership. But yeah, then so sometimes it's okay to let them be in part of a group with a partner who has more passion or more purpose, and they learn from them. And that's the way I did it, is let them start out that way. Then I would push them a little more. Yeah, one-on-one conferences, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think, yes, I do have the right question there. Yeah, you mentioned groups, and that's such an important piece of this. And that's something that I didn't really plan to get into, but thank you so much. That's important. And I like your point about larger than 3, and maybe that student doesn't really have the same amount of ownership anymore, because in groups of 4 or larger, then you have the coasters, right? And those are just spectating. Andi, what would you do here? I know for me, I like to start out Genius Hour at the top of the term with just a brainstorming session of passions. And I tell the students, not all of these passions will be Genius Hourable, but I want to hear about what makes your heart beat, what you are interested in. And if they do run dry of ideas at some point, we go back to that list of 15 or so passions. Andi, how do you respond to this student who has no interest? They don't know what they want to do.
I think, first of all, I just want to say I love what Denise said about the groups. This is why I love things like this, because we learn from each other. I love learning from Denise. I could sit here and listen to her all day. But I really think that that's such a good idea about the groups being small. I would say that when we think about students who say they have no interest or they're not sure what they want to do, usually that is a lack of exposure, right? They haven't been exposed to enough, or they just don't know what exists. I think sometimes it's knowing why they don't know their passion. Is it because they're embarrassed to share what that passion is? Is it because they legit don't know? Is it because they're introverted and they just want to keep that to themselves? But I think just exposing them to new things, and if that's the case, spending time with just giving them opportunities to use resources like Wonderopolis and DIY.org and all of those places where they can just see the things, right? These are the things that are out there. These are the things that exist. And when we would do things like that in my classroom, oftentimes my students would say things like, is that a thing? Do people really do that? Could I? And they were just their minds were blown that even existed, simply because they had not been exposed to it yet. So I think exposure is a big deal and something that we need to spend time on, versus just trying to check off okay, what's your passion? Go ahead and tell me. I'll also say, and I just want to make sure that I say this, AJ Giuliani, I'm a big fan of his work, and he has that passion bracket where on one side they list the things that they love, and on the other side they list the things that bother them. And then they narrow those things down, right? So they have to prioritize, which is a skill they're not always great at and they need to practice, but they have to prioritize those things to where they come down to one thing that they love and one thing that bothers them. And AJ says, that's where the magic happens. And for us in my classroom, that was really the case. And so I never let my students decide their groups until we finish the passion brackets. And then I would say, hey, you guys have a similar passion bracket. Would you be interested in working together? And sometimes that would pair up kids who wouldn't typically work together or whatever. But that passion bracket was huge, and it helped my kids think about things that they might not have thought of otherwise.
So good. I'm not familiar with AJ's passion bracket. I'll have to check that out. And I do subscribe to his newsletter. Love his stuff. So again, that name is AJ Giuliani if you want to dig deeper into this area. Well, we're going to start to wrap this up. Ladies, I am curious, and this sort of takes it into the space of now our passion projects and our self-directed learning. Who is inspiring you right now? Who is lighting your fire for learning? Is there an author or a creator of some kind who you are gleaning a lot from? Andi, you just mentioned AJ Giuliani. Is there someone else who is also lighting your fire right now?
Oh gosh, this is hard because I could go on and on. Don Lectrick, always. I'm always a big fan of Don's work and what he's doing in the space, just the change that he's creating and his passion for changing things. The entire Genius Hour community, right? Denise, Galit, Joy Kerr. I'm just so thankful to all of them because they really gave me an opportunity to change my career. And so anything they put out there or share, I'm always interested in. But I do want to give a shout out to just a couple of there's also a lot of ed tech tools that are changing the Genius Hour, doing it in a way that is manageable and meaningful, right? And so just knowing that so many of those tools exist, whether it be Wonderopolis, Thrively, there's a new place called Tract. I'm really inspired by learning about all of these tools, what they are and how they can be used to really, my focus is how do you do this in a way that is manageable for the educator and not so overwhelming that we want to give up on it, but ultimately meaningful for our learners and they want to invest in it. So I think ed tech plays a big role in that. So I think it's important to pay attention to what's coming out and what exists.
Absolutely, and I'm a big ed tech fan as well, so I could geek out all day on the new tools, but it is always about the learning, and thank you for saying that. Thank you for mentioning that. Before I forget, Andi, you dropped a great link to a Google slideshow in the private chat. Am I allowed to share that in the public chat? All right, I will do that for the viewers.
Yes.
Podcast listeners, unfortunately, you won't be able to click on that, but for those that are following the broadcast, you'll be able to take advantage of that in a moment here. Denise, who is inspiring you right now? Who's lighting your fire?
I have been working on a TESOL certificate recently, so I've been reading a lot of ESL, ELL folks and following them on Twitter and also writing poetry. So I'm a little bit doing my own Genius Hour thing right now. So I've neglected my Genius Hour community for the last few months. But yeah, so I'm working on ELL to try to build that, my passion for literacy and English language learners. And I look forward to being able to do Genius Hour with new students soon in California. I'll be going back in January, like I said.
All right, very exciting. Well, we look forward to welcoming you back to this side of the pond. Well, ladies, both of you have written some great books, and I want to talk about that here as well for teachers, again, who are trying to find their way in Genius Hour, trying to learn more. So, Andi, I'll go back to you for a moment. You've published a few, so I'll put them up on the screen. Would you sort of describe for us what have you published and maybe what else is in the works in terms of Genius Hour resources?
Okay. So a few things. First of all, Genius Hour was the first book that Passion Projects that Ignite Innovation and Student Inquiry had so much fun writing that. It was probably, looking back on it, it was more fun than I knew it was writing it. During it, I was like, what am I even doing right now? But really that just walks you through that process that roadmap that we developed and kind of thought through. We are releasing a second edition to Genius Hour very soon with some of these new things that I talked about, with purpose being a big part here. The second book with the resources, that has a lot of that purpose talk in it. So those two kind of go hand in hand, and it's more the resources that you could just take out of the book and utilize in a way that makes sense for you. And then A Meaningful Mess is more just my perspective of education, because that's what I call a lot of my work, because I think it's okay for learning to be messy as long as it's meaningful. And just in closing, I would say that we are working on a new book just around the idea of designing for depth. So learning experiences that provide depth. Genius Hour obviously plays a big role in that and will have a part in the book, but that is what I'm working on right now and super excited to move forward with that.
All right, that's a great collection, great starting point. And Denise, what have you published? And tell us about, just give us a summary of what we can expect here.
We have, the Genius Hour guidebook, from Galit Z and I wrote it together some years ago. We were, it was going to be an online publication, and then then it switched. Yeah, we had a great publisher who helped us, a great editor, and that's all that I've been working on. So I think, I'm excited for Andi's new book. I don't have anything new coming, but thank you for asking.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's valuable too. Thank you so much, Denise. And again, that's the Genius Hour guidebook. So both of those are available. And Andi, thinking back to yours, you really focus on the P's and passion projects. But do you see, I should have asked this way earlier, but do you see those two terms, Genius Hour and passion projects, as synonymous?
I do. And I work with a lot of districts, and sometimes I go into a district and they say, we call it Genius Hour. And sometimes I go to a district and they say, we call it 20% time, or we call it passion projects. And I just always say, look, it doesn't matter what we call it. It's just understanding that it is that opportunity for our students to be in the driver's seat and for them to pursue their passion during the school day. So yeah, I would say short answer, yes, 100%.
All right. Well, as we close, ladies, I am so grateful for our time today, and I look forward to reconnecting with you through the year. If I actually, sadly, my teaching assignment is changing a little bit this year. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do Genius Hour projects myself, some of the happiest moments in the classroom, but I look forward to coaching and encouraging other teachers to do the same. How and where can we join your learning journeys? What are the best ways to connect with you? Denise, we'll start with you.
Right now I'm just writing on my blog. It was on that slide. This is dkrebs.edublogs.org. So I share my learnings and my poems, things I'm doing, part of some writing groups, and that's usually where I'm most active right now. A little bit on Twitter, but more there.
All right. Thanks, Denise. And Andi, you've got a lot of media going on, which I'm a big fan of. Tell us how we can connect with you there.
Okay, I would just share the top three. First of all, Twitter at
Sure.
McNair AN3. I tend to tweet just what I'm thinking at the moment, which sometimes is a good idea, sometimes maybe not. But at McNair AN3, my website is where my blog lives, so andymcnair.com, super easy. And then you can just click on Andi's blog, and almost everything that I talk about, I write about, and so that's over on the blog. And then finally, I have a podcast just called A Meaningful Mess, where I just kind of get on and talk about the latest and greatest, and again, just what's going on up here. So anyway, those are the three places. I would love to connect with you guys, and I love learning from everyone else just as much as I love sharing. So all of the connections are always so much fun, and just makes being an educator a little bit easier right now, just to be connected and know other people are experiencing some of the same things.
So good. And thank you both for modeling that lifelong learning. You know, I meant to touch on it more, but thinking about the challenging circumstances we face with Genius Hour from home, remote Genius Hour, if you will, and these new tools like Flipgrid, for example, that are allowing students to report on their learning. One of the advantages is that students can do more learning from home. They've got access to their kitchens. They can, they've got in some cases, the garage or the shop or these other places of learning. And so, yeah, Denise, did you want to jump in there?
Oh, yeah, I just have to say, it was one of my very favorite Genius Hours was when we did it from home. It was just so sweet and so cute to watch their amazing cooking and sewing, and grandma and grandpa and mom and dad involved. And that was last spring. We did that when we went home in 2020. Is that when that was? 2020 when we first went home. Yeah, it was beautiful. Yeah. There is some benefits in doing it from home.
Yeah, I had some of the same experiences, and I agree, very heartwarming. You've got kids training their pets. You can see parents. You can see all these relatives in the house and get a sense for the life of the house. So kind of a different look, but one of those silver linings. And Denise, is kind of sad that this pandemic has worn on so long, we're starting to lose track of what year it started in. So that's telling, isn't it? But in all seriousness, again, I want to say thank you for joining me. If you are joining us live or on the replay here on YouTube, one of the best ways you can thank us for this time together, if this meant anything or was valuable at all, hit subscribe on the Teachers on Fire YouTube channel. I would be so grateful if you did that. Ladies, I'm going to say thanks again, but I know our learning is going to continue. So we will be in touch throughout the year. And if you do have more Genius Hour questions, make sure you reach out to Andi and Denise. All right, take care, ladies. We will talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.